I think in the first video I said that I was going to do this in 6 parts. Well, this this review has gotten a bit larger than I thought it would be, so it's going to be 7 views. But don't worry, we're almost halfway there, and I thank you very much for watching this far. Let's get right to it, shall we? Alright. Barnabas the Vampire. You would think there couldn't be another character just as good as him. Well, there is. And much like Barnabas, he is at first a villain, but over time becomes a hero and an ally. But he is just a little different, for Quentin is both a warlock and a werewolf, and also an immortal. But we'll get to that later. The first story is The Ghost of Quentin Collins and Beth Chavez haunt Collinwood. David Collins and Amy Jennings find a secret room at Collinwood and find the ghosts of Quentin and Beth, whom are trying to possess the children and drive the rest of the Collins family out of the house. The character of Quentin and his role is inspired by the character of Peter Quint in Henry James's Gothic novel The Turn of the Screw. At first, the story is just a simple ghost story with little scares and mostly just full of shocks and tense cliffhangers, but eventually becomes a to quote a Clockwork Orange, real horror show. Quentin became fucking scary. He would pop out of nowhere and just scare me. My favorite scare was when David was at the old house talking to Barnabas and outside the window is just darkness. Nothing. And when David looks out, there is this red light that turns on from below the window and shines on Quentin. It scared the crap out of me. He just appeared out of nowhere. Sorry. Quentin was scary at first, but in a later storyline he becomes more likable, and we will get to that. This storyline leads into the next series of storylines that became the height of the show's popularity. But before we get to that, there is another storyline that ran parallel to this one that gives a fond farewell to the first character that led us to the horror of Collinwood, and that is Victoria Winters. The second story is Barnabas' mission to save Victoria Winters, or A Return to 1796. At Collinwood, evidence piles up that Victoria Winters is in trouble in the year 1796, so Barnabas goes back in time to change history and save her. This storyline was a nice little storyline and movie to itself. It was really kind of a subplot, but at the same time it was a main storyline, for it was big in the sense that it had many episodes dedicated to it. Multiple characters, big and small, and once Barnabas went to the past, we didn't get back to the storyline of Quentin's ghost until Barnabas came back to the future. Or back to the present, I should say. It is a good storyline, exciting, tense, and shocking, especially since going back in time turns Barnabas back into a vampire, because up until now, in the present timeline, he was cured, if you remember. Turns it back to vampire, and for a time, and we get Angelique back, which causes of course, a lot of tension and pain for Barnabas. By the end of the storyline, a rare moment happens where a character gets a happy ending. And we all get to say a fond farewell to Victoria Winters. And yes, I actually did cry for her. It was sad. Alright, the third storyline. Barnabas' mission to save David Collins. This storyline takes place after the story of Quentin Collins' ghost. David is going to die. The family has been driven out of the great house. To save David, Barnabas uses the power of the I Ching wands to travel back in time to the year 1897 to find out what caused Quentin to haunt Collinwood and prevent it. This storyline was good, filled with tense and shocking cliffhangers with surprises happening at every turn. This story introduces many characters whom we now follow for several episodes, 184 to be exact, and much like the Collins family of the present and in 1795 and 6, each member is well written and portrayed, and much like Barnabas, we get to see what Quentin is like before his affliction. Unlike Barnabas, Quentin is a charming liar, a womanizer, and a warlock, greedy, and an egotistic maniac. But much like Barnabas, he soon realizes his faults and changes to a hero and an ally. Much to Dark Shadows' tradition, in one episode, Quentin steals a will from his grandmother's coffin and begins to hear a heartbeat that tortures him. This is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Telltale Heart, obviously. The fourth storyline, Jenny Collins, the Mad Woman in the Attic. Inspired by the character of Bertha from Charlotte Bronte's Gothic novel Jane Eyre, this storyline tells the story of Quentin's ex-wife, whom went crazy after he left her, and her determined revenge on Quentin. This was an interesting storyline that answered a few questions about Quentin's past, but raised more, for it is suggested that she had twins that are Quentin's. Very mysterious, this storyline. The fifth storyline, Laura Collins the Phoenix. Yes, you heard me right, Laura Collins the Phoenix. Edward Collins' wife, Laura, has returned and wants her children, Jameson and Nora, to return to the fires with her. This was a nice subplot and kind of a continuity plot that played out since, if you recall, Laura arrives in a storyline almost 100 years later in the year 1996-67 area. It was good to see this character and actress again. They got the same actress to play the same part. Although this storyline plays out almost the same way and ends the same way. It was still shocking and had, your typical edge-of-your-seat thrills, especially with the introduction of Reverend Gregory Trask, the descendant of Trask from 1795. And much like the other Trask, this is a character you just love to hate. The school Trask tyrannically runs is inspired by the Charles Dickens novel Nicholas Nickleby. The sixth storyline, Magda Roski's werewolf curse on Quentin. Quentin has accidentally killed Jenny, but unbeknownst to everyone, she is the sister of a gypsy who lives at the old house named Magda, and she places a werewolf curse on Quentin and all his firstborn male descendants. Her revenge is going well, with Quentin changing at every full moon and killing until she discovers Jenny had twin children and helps Quentin to reverse it. But will his cure be a curse all on its own? This was another fun storyline where every episode cliffhanger made me want to get to the next episode to see what would happen next. The cure ends up being a portrait that will change instead of Quentin and turns Quentin immortal. This is inspired by Oscar Wilde's Gothic novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The seventh storyline, Gregory Trask's manipulation of Judith Collins. Trask wants control of the Collins family and marries Judith Collins and drives her insane so he can gain power of attorney. But Trask will soon learn that hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn. This was a fun, old-school kind of thriller story where eventually the tables turn and all that the villain deserves gets it. Much like his ancestor, his fate is inspired by... Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Casca Amontillado. I hope I pronounced that right. The eighth story, The Hand of Count Patolfi. To try and cure Quentin, Magda steals from a gypsy tribe a powerful sacred hand that has a mind of its own. It fails to cure Quentin, but causes great terror in Collins' support, and many people will kill to get it, even Patolfi himself, whom wants it reattached to himself, and becomes a force not to be reckoned with. Inspired by Guy de Maupassant's, I hope I pronounced that right, sorry, short story, The Monkey's Paw, we get this kind of lost treasure hunt story mixed with a be careful what you wish for moral story that was fun to watch. This story introduces a new villain, Count Patolfi, whom always has something up his sleeve and becomes a dangerous foe for everyone. There is this one fun moment where Quentin is tortured by a swinging pendulum blade that is inspired by, obviously, Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Pit and the Pendulum. The ninth storyline we got here is the creation of Amanda Harris. A woman named Amanda Harris comes to Collinsport with no past. She falls in love with Quentin, but it is discovered the reason she has no past is because the man who painted Quentin's portrait painted a portrait of her from his own imagination and has the power to create things from his own mind. This was an interesting subplot that is a love triangle story full of tragedy and lost loves and jealousy. The 10th storyline, Barnabas's infatuation with Kitty Soames. Lady Kitty Soames comes to Collinwood to try and marry Edward for his money, but once she sees Barnabas, she becomes conflicted, for she sometimes believes she is Josette Collins and wants to be with Barnabas, and at times struggles to stay Kitty and be with Edward. Barnabas believes she is reincarnation of Josette and will do anything to get her. This is another interesting love story that wasn't full of twists or turns like others, but it was more of a character and story piece, and one hopes that the right choice will be made in the end. But much like any love stories in this series, tragedy occurs. 11th storyline, Count Petofi body swaps with Quentin. Upon discovering how Barnabas traveled through time, Count Petofi searches for a body to inhabit that will exist in the future. He discovers Quentin will and swaps spirits and minds and lives in Quentin's body. This was a thrilling race against time story that was exciting till the very end, leaving one to wonder if Petofi died in the end. The character of Petofi is based on a real person named Count of Saint Germain, a medieval alchemist who claimed to have attained the secret of immortality. The storylines I've just mentioned, from the Barnabas mission to save David to the body swap, are considered the 1897 storyline, and is when the show was extremely popular. And I could see why, for there was always an edge-of-your-seat cliffhanger, and I needed to know, and the need to know what would happen next, and need to see the next episode. It was great fun, and it became one of my favorite storylines. However, as it is with all entertainment, when one is at the top, there's only one way to go. 12th storyline, Barnabas under the control of the Leviathans. Barnabas stumbles across an altar in the woods. Two beings in hooded cloaks overpower him and brainwash him into a cause of an ancient race of beings known as the Leviathans. They use him to bring a box to the present, and not only start and lead a cult, but choose two people to raise a child that will be their god. Being brainwashed, Barnabas is willing and does what he is told. However, upon realizing the harm being caused, he fights against them at the risk of becoming a vampire again. Not many audiences liked that Barnabas was under the control of the Leviathans, but I thought it was interesting seeing Barnabas as the villain again, and the mystery of all the Leviathan people was intriguing. And it was also interesting to see Caroline's father be introduced. But this storyline did seem a little slow. But it was thrilling to see the cult growing with people and wondering who was good and who was evil. The 13th storyline, The Mystery of Grant Douglas and Olivia Corey. Dr. Hoffman is looking for paintings of Charles Delaware Tate to find the portrait of Quentin Collins. So is a man named Grant Douglas, whom looks like Quentin, and an actress named Olivia Corey, whom looks like Amanda. Unfortunately, Grant has amnesia, and both Hoffman and Olivia try to make him remember, for Olivia has so little time left before someone comes to collect her. This story is inspired by the Greek mythological tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. This is one of the few love stories in this series, and was a nice break from the thriller supernatural stories. And you find yourself really wanting, spoiler alert, Quentin and Amanda to be with each other, and to live forever. But much like many love stories in this series, it ends with tragedy. And we find Quentin and Barnabas share the feelings of lost love. In this story, Death is the Grim Reaper, or Death, is a character named Mr. Best. He was an interesting character, and was fun to see that the people he takes to the other side, he takes them to his hotel until they go wherever. It was an original idea, and I liked and thought that was cool. The 14th storyline, Chris Jennings' Werewolf Curse. Yes, we come back to this storyline. Chris is a descendant of Quentin, but that does not help to find a cure. And one must be found before he is found out by the people and the Leviathans. For the Leviathans could never control werewolves, and are a weakness to their god and leader Jeb Hawks, and therefore must be killed. This is one of those subplots that is of its own, but also integrates into other storylines and affects them, and made not only this storyline a good thriller, but the other storylines as well. You hope when he becomes the wolf, he kills the bad guys and not innocent people, while at the same time you hope for a cure. But unfortunately, this storyline abruptly ends due to the personal health problems with the actor playing Chris. In the end, the werewolf storyline was a good thriller, but I wish it had an ending. Storyline number 15, The Leviathan Child. Megan and Philip Todd are newcomers to Collinsport and have opened an antique shop. They have been chosen to raise a child that will lead the Leviathans to rule the world, but as the child grows at an accelerated rate, they find it is more difficult and less of an honor than thought. This storyline was just interesting to watch than thrilling or scary, for this felt more like a filler story to just show the early stages of a child that will become Jeb Hawks as an adult, and to see the cult grow. There were one or two shocks and scares, but they weren't that big. It was an okay storyline, but necessary to develop the character of the Leviathan Child and build up the threat of the Leviathans. Storyline number 16, Jeb Hawks, the Leviathan Leader. The Leviathan Child is now grown up and ready to take control. However, he is too cocky, aggressive, and does not care what the Leviathan book Bible says he is to do and how. He wants to do things his way. However, his love for young Carolyn may make him see the error of his ways. This storyline had pretty much everything in it: love, horror, mystery, thrills, and action. It was slow to start out, but it started getting exciting very soon. A lot of people died, for there were close calls, scares, and indeed love. For his love for Carolyn does make him change and eventually become good. Now, before you think all villains become good guys, the storyline brings back the villain Nicholas Blair, who is one who planned the return of the Leviathans to get out of hell and have a way for the devil to control mankind. But in the end, we get another tragedy. It is sad that when a character you first hate and you start to care for dies. It kind of pisses me off because I want to see more of this character. The storyline involving the life of the Leviathans can be formed together to what the fans call the Leviathan storyline, obviously. And the whole Leviathan storyline is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. And with the Leviathan storyline, we really start to see that the writers are getting to the end of their game, for they have started to reuse the things done before, like people turning into vampires and storylines seeming not as fresh and exciting as earlier episodes. For by now, the creator of the show, Dan Curtis, and the writers started to run out of ideas. Storyline number 17, The Death of Angelique Collins. To try and escape his vampire curse, Barnabas enters the world of parallel time. Unfortunately, he is still a vampire and is soon discovered by writer William Loomis, whom holds Barnabas hostage to use as a source for a new book. Meanwhile, the Collins family in parallel time have recently lost the mistress of Collinwood, Angelique. But her death is more mysterious than it appears, as the new mistress, Maggie, discovers, and could mean that not only was Angelique's death a murder, but was done by a member of the family. This was an interesting supernatural story that had plenty of plot twists, moments of revenge, and shocking moments, and a nice bit of special effects to have the same actor play two roles in the same scene. However, there did not seem much progress in the storyline until Barnabas was released from imprisonment. During the storyline, they were making the movie House of Dark Shadows, and therefore certain characters were written out until filming was done. When filming was done and both Barnabas and Julia Hoffman were involved in the story, that it seemed like we were progressing through the story. However, having said that, it was good to see that other characters like Quentin, Elizabeth, and Angelique, etc., could hold the show and keep it going without Barnabas. This story was inspired by Daphne du Maurier's Gothic novel Rebecca. Cyrus Longworth's experiment, storyline number 18. Scientist Cyrus Longworth is creating a potion to separate the good and evil from a human being, but soon discovers his potion creates nothing more than evil, for when he drinks it, he becomes the sinister John Yeager, who will do anything to get what he wants, even kill. Cyrus realizes Jaeger is evil but cannot resist his freedom and continues to become him, but at a great cost. Obviously, the storyline is based on Robert Louis Stevenson's short story The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was an okay subplot that was predictable but enjoyable. Much like the previous storyline, not much progress was made until Barnabas became more involved. Storyline number 19, Roxanne Drew. A beautiful woman catches the eye of Barnabas named Roxanne Drew and finds he cannot control himself and has found true love. But as always, Barnabas cannot catch a break with love as life and death situations occur to prevent him from loving her. In the 1970 parallel time, Roxanne is a normal woman whom Barnabas falls madly in love with and lets him bite her neck and wants to be with him, but unfortunately is not able to be with him when he is transported back to his own time band. In this part of the story, this is a simple love story but becomes more complicated in further episodes. In 1970, in the normal time band, Barnabas finds the same Roxanne, but she does not know who he is, for she is of this time band and not parallel time. But this Roxanne has a secret. At the same time, Maggie is being attacked by a vampire, and it is not Barnabas. It is Roxanne. Barnabas finds it difficult to destroy her, and thinks that by going back in time he can prevent her becoming a vampire. In 1840, we find the love story comes to a climax and another tragedy. Roxanne is engaged to Lamar Trask, but after being bit and fallen in love with Barnabas, she breaks it off. But Angelique discovers Barnabas' love, and as per the terms of the curse she put on Barnabas, Roxanne is killed but rises as a vampire under Angelique's control. Barnabas tried to prevent it and even separate himself from Roxanne, but fails. Lamar and Julia Hoffman become victims. Roxanne's brother Randall takes it upon himself to give Roxanne peace. Her last words were cries for help for Barnabas. Storyline number 20, 1995. Instead of being transported back to 1970 in their own time band, they were transported to the year 1995. Barnabas and Julia, they find themselves in Collinwood, and it is destroyed, and members of the family are either dead, missing, or mentally disturbed. This short storyline was an interesting idea, however, since they traveled to the future, technologically it is still of 1970, and there are no computers or modern vehicles, etc. But I will admit I was impressed with the set of Collinwood. With the budget they made Collinwood look as if it were really destroyed. Beams broken, planks of wood, and overgrown plants and rubble made it all believable. The relationship of Barnabas and Dr. Hoffman is tested when the ghost of Gerard Stiles has Hoffman under his control to betray Barnabas and even sacrifice herself for him, but Barnabas saves her and they travel back to 1970. Storyline number 21, The Ghosts of Gerard Stiles and Daphne and Harridge haunt Collinwood. Back from 1995, Barnabas and Julia use the clues they have to try and prevent the destruction of Collinwood. Meanwhile, the ghosts of Gerard Stiles and Daphne and Harridge haunt Collinwood and begin their plans that involve the possession of David Collins and Hallie Stokes. This storyline was a mixture of genres with ghost stories, shocks, horror, and thrills. There were good shocks and good scares, and the climactic episode where Collinwood is destroyed by zombies is terrifying, exciting, and shocking. It was sad to see a house we love be destroyed, and yet at the same time it was fun because of the edge-of-your-seat tension of the moment. As it was interesting to see how many of the characters were involved and are affected by it. For instance, Quentin has a complicated relationship with the ghost of Daphne, and by the end, the relationship causes Daphne to not to want to go along with Gerard's plan, and when she dies, causes Quentin to go mad. Storyline number 22, 1840 and the Head of Judah Zachary. Julia uses the stairway through time and finds she has traveled to the year 1840. Barnabas uses the I Ching to possess his body in that time, and the two of them try to prevent the destruction of Collinwood in this year, seeing that Gerard and Daphne are alive at this time. Meanwhile, Desmond Collins returns from Asia with a glass box containing a disembodied head. The head belongs to Warlock Judah Zachary, whom was beheaded in 1692 for witchcraft. But he still has powers and summons under his control Julia and a woman named Letitia to find his body and attach his head to it. The storyline is just an introductory, the storyline that sets up all the characters and their stories and plans. It wasn't a bad storyline, but one that didn't have many thrills or excitement. But I will admit it was nice to see Ben Stokes again, and it was sad to see him be killed. Storyline number 23, Judah Zachary's possession of Gerard Stiles. With the failure of getting his head reattached to his body, Warlock Judah Zachary possesses Gerard Stiles and begins his revenge on the Collins family by setting a chain of events that point to Quentin Collins I to being a warlock and practicing witchcraft. This was an exciting storyline of revenge that kept you guessing what was going to happen. And since a descendant of Reverend Trask is in this storyline named Lamar Trask, it just goes to show that the Trask family is destined to be loathed by all audiences and the characters. There were a lot of twists and turns and shocking moments. Storyline number 24, Joanna Mills. Daphne Harridge has come to kill Quentin Collins because she blames him for the death of her sister, Joanna Mills, but instead falls in love with him and becomes the family governess. Quentin has been receiving strange letters from his ex-mistress Joanna, whom is dead and cannot understand why or how. He soon discovers who Daphne is, and both work together to find out who has been writing the letter that soon both have been receiving. Is it from Joanna? One day, Joanna Mills herself comes and is a shock to everyone, but what is the real reason she has come back? This was an interesting storyline in that it was a combination of a love story, thriller, and a ghost story. You had the failing marriages of Samantha, the bitch, and Quentin, and Daphne set on revenge, who throws away seeing Quentin is not at fault and falls in love. However, Samantha won't grant a divorce, making things difficult. And Joanna, who forgives Quentin and lets him go. But before she lets him go, it was a classic love triangle which ended peacefully. And much like any good storyline, the villain gets their just desserts. For it is found out who wrote the letters and who originally killed Joanna. Samantha. And the Joanna who came is a ghost. And she has her revenge on Samantha, which was gratefully satisfying, and the lovers live happily ever after. The only problem is that Joanna didn't get a proper goodbye. She was just there and then gone. Storyline number 25. Lamar Trask's revenge on Barnabas Collins. If you remember, in 1796, Barnabas walled up Reverend Trask in the basement of the old house. Trask's son, Lamar, not only wants to find his father, but make the person who did it pay. Upon investigating if Barnabas is part of a coven with Quentin, Lamar finds the evidence he needs to act out his vengeance. This was an edge-of-your-seat thriller that actually made me think Barnabas might actually die, and things were made worse when Angelique came into the picture. However, because we find out Angelique was involved with Judah becoming a severed head, she becomes an ally. But much like many storylines of Dark Shadows, there is tragedy and the much appreciated death of a Trask. As time goes on, we unwillingly become sympathetic to Angelique and actually like her. And even Barnabas realizes her love for him and falls in love with her and tells her his love for her as she dies in his arms after being shot by Lamar Trask. It is then Barnabas severely wounds Lamar, who gets trapped in 1841 parallel time and dies. Thank God. Storyline number 26. Quentin Collins' witchcraft trial. It appears Judah Zachary's revenge is going as according to plan. Prosecutor Charles Dawson plans to provide beyond a reasonable doubt that Quentin is a warlock, whereas Quentin's cousin Desmond and Barnabas try to prove that he is innocent. Will they succeed, or will he be guilty and sentenced to death by beheading? This was a fun storyline to watch, for it was like a John Grisham court thriller mixed with supernatural elements, but also because the actors got a rare chance to shine. This storyline is just dialogue in the courtroom, where people are fighting their case, and figuratively at each other's throats. It was a joy to watch all these actors perform these scenes. Mind you, the lines the actors speak were learned the night before, on the way to the studio, or on the set the day they filmed. Kudos to the actors. And then, once all is done, Barnabas and Dr. Hoffman return to a restored Collinwood, and the family is safe and secure and freed from curses. However, in a parallel time, one curse still torments the Collins family. And that will be for another video.